The desert heat shimmered across the compound like liquid glass, distorting the horizon where the mountains met the endless expanse of sand. Sarah Mitchell wiped the sweat from her forehead with the back of her latex glove, leaving a small streak of dried blood from the patient she had just finished treating. The medical tent buzzed with the constant hum of generators and the quiet murmur of wounded soldiers receiving care. At 28, Sarah had seen more trauma than most emergency room doctors twice her age. Her auburn hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail, and her green eyes held a depth that spoke of countless nights spent pulling people back from the edge of death. She moved with the precise efficiency of someone who had learned that every second could mean the difference between life and death. The forward operating base in Afghanistan's Helmand province was a far cry from the sterile hospitals back home in Ohio, where she had trained. Here, dust coated everything. The air tasted of diesel fuel and gunpowder, and the sound of helicopters was as constant as her own heartbeat. Sarah had volunteered for this deployment 6 months ago, driven by a desire to make a real difference in the world. What she hadn't expected was how the harsh reality of war would strip away every comfortable assumption she had ever held about herself. Corporal Jake Thompson lay on the gurney before her, his face pale beneath his desert tan. Shrapnel from an improvised explosive device had torn through his left shoulder, and Sarah worked methodically to clean and dress the wound. Jake was barely 21, with kind brown eyes that reminded her of her younger brother back home. "How's it looking, Doc?" Jake asked, trying to keep his voice steady despite the obvious pain. Sarah smiled at him, the kind of reassuring smile she had perfected over years of practice. "You're going to be fine, Corporal." The metal missed anything vital, and you'll have a great story to tell when you get home. As she worked, Sarah could hear the distant rumble of artillery fire. The Taliban had been increasing their attacks on the base over the past few weeks, and everyone could feel the tension building. The medical staff had been briefed on emergency procedures, but Sarah tried not to think about what would happen if the base came under direct assault. Nurse Mitchell called Staff Sergeant Rodriguez from across the tent. "We've got incoming wounded from the patrol that went out this morning." Sarah quickly finished bandaging Jake's shoulder and moved to prepare for the new arrivals. The familiar routine helped calm her nerves, organize the supplies, check the 4 bags, ensure the surgical instruments were sterile and ready. She had done this hundreds of times before, but today something felt different. There was an electricity in the air that made the hair on the back of her neck stand up. The helicopter touched down outside with a thunderous roar of rotors, and within seconds, the medical team was rushing stretchers into the tent. The first patient was unconscious, blood soaking through his uniform from multiple gunshot wounds. Sarah immediately went to work, her hands moving with practiced precision as she assessed his injuries and began stabilizing his vital signs. "What's the situation out there?" she asked the medic who had accompanied the wounded. "It's getting hot," the medic replied, his face grim. "Intelligence suggests the Taliban are planning something big. They've been probing our defenses all week, and there are reports of significant troop movements in the surrounding area." As Sarah continued treating the wounded soldier, she couldn't shake the feeling that they were all standing on the edge of a precipice. The base had always felt relatively secure, protected by its fortified walls and the elite soldiers who patrolled its perimeter. But war had a way of making even the safest places feel vulnerable. The afternoon wore on, and the stream of wounded continued. Some were victims of roadside bombs. Others had been caught in firefights with insurgents. Each patient who came through the tent doors brought with them stories of an increasingly dangerous situation beyond the base's walls. Sarah treated them all with the same level of care and professionalism, but inside, her anxiety was growing. As the sun began to set over the compound, painting the sky in shades of orange and red, Sarah finally had a moment to step outside the medical tent. The evening air was cooler, offering some relief from the oppressive heat of the day. She walked to the edge of the compound's perimeter, where she could see the guard towers silhouetted against the darkening sky. "Long day." Sarah turned to find Chief Petty Officer Marcus Kane approaching. At 35, Marcus was a veteran Navy SEAL with more combat experience than most of the other soldiers on the base combined. He was tall and lean, with dark hair and intense blue eyes that seemed to take in everything around him. Sarah had seen him around the compound over the past few months, but they had rarely spoken beyond brief exchanges when he brought wounded team members to the medical tent. "They're all long days out here," Sarah replied, grateful for the company. "But yes, this one has felt particularly heavy." Marcus nodded, his eyes scanning the horizon with the automatic vigilance of someone who had spent years in hostile territory. The chatter we're picking up suggests things are going to get worse before they get better. You and your medical team might want to review your emergency protocols. There was something in his tone that made Sarah look at him more closely. Are you expecting an attack? In this business, you always expect an attack, Marcus said. It's the only way to stay alive. But, yeah, all signs are pointing to something significant happening soon. Sarah felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cooling desert air. What kind of something? Marcus was quiet for a long moment, weighing his words carefully. The kind that tests everyone's limits. The kind where being a nurse or a cook or a mechanic doesn't matter anymore. Everyone becomes a soldier. As if summoned by his words, the sound of distant explosions echoed across the desert. Both Sarah and Marcus instinctively looked toward the source of the noise, seeing flashes of light on the horizon. The attacks were getting closer to the base, and the implication was clear. I should get back, Sarah said, though she found herself reluctant to leave Marcus's steady presence. Sarah, Marcus called as she started to walk away. She turned back, surprised that he had used her first name. If things go bad, remember that your training goes deeper than just medicine. Trust your instincts. Sarah wanted to ask what he meant by that, but another round of explosions, this time closer, sent them both hurrying back to their respective duties. As she entered the medical tent, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that Marcus knew something about her that she didn't even know about herself. The night shift brought its own challenges. The base's lighting was kept to a minimum for security reasons, and the medical tent operated under dim emergency lights that cast long shadows across the walls. Sarah found herself jumping at every unexpected sound. The clang of metal equipment, the hiss of the ventilation system, the distant sound of patrol vehicles moving through the compound. Around midnight, a new patient was brought in, a young Afghan interpreter who had been caught in a crossfire while returning to the base. As Sarah worked to treat his injuries, she learned that the Taliban forces in the area had been reinforced by foreign fighters, well-trained and well-equipped soldiers who were far more dangerous than the usual insurgents they dealt with. They're planning something very big, the interpreter whispered to Sarah as she cleaned his wounds. My cousin, he lives in the village near here. The fighters, they have been asking about the American base, about how many soldiers, about the defenses. Sarah felt her blood run cold. Did you report this to intelligence? The interpreter nodded weakly. Yes, but I fear it may be too late. They speak of attacking when the moon is dark, when the American eyes cannot see so well. Looking up through the small window of the medical tent, Sarah could see that the moon was indeed waning, only a thin crescent visible in the star-filled sky. In just a few nights, it would be completely dark, the perfect cover for an assault. As she continued her shift, Sarah found her mind wandering to thoughts of home. Her parents' house in Columbus, with its white picket fence, and the oak tree she used to climb as a child. Her younger brother Danny, who was finishing his senior year of high school and planning to study engineering. Her best friend Emma, who thought Sarah was crazy for volunteering for a deployment in Afghanistan, but who sent care packages filled with homemade cookies and gossip magazines anyway. All of these people felt impossibly far away, separated by more than just miles and time zones. The person she had been when she left Ohio, optimistic, naive, certain that good intentions and medical training would be enough to make a difference, felt like a stranger now. The desert had a way of burning away everything except what was absolutely essential, and Sarah was beginning to discover that she was made of sterner stuff than she had ever imagined. At 4 a.m, just as Sarah was beginning to think the night might pass without incident, the first mortar round struck the compound. The explosion shook the medical tent like an earthquake, sending equipment crashing to the floor and plunging them into temporary darkness as the power went out. Emergency lighting kicked in a moment later, bathing everything in an eerie red glow. Sarah's training took over immediately. She quickly moved to secure any patients who might be injured by the falling equipment and began preparing for what she knew would be a flood of casualties. This is not a drill, came the voice over the compound's PA system. We are under attack. All personnel to battle stations. Through the tent walls, Sarah could hear the sharp crack of rifle fire and the deeper boom of heavy weapons. The attack had begun, and she realized with crystal clarity that everything Marcus had warned her about was coming true. The safe, controlled environment of the medical tent was about to become the front line of a battle, and everyone inside would need to become something more than they had been before. As Sarah worked to prepare for the wounded that would soon be arriving, she thought about Marcus's parting words, "Trust your instincts." She had no idea what instinct he was referring to, but as the sounds of battle grew closer, she suspected she was about to find out. The girl from Ohio who had arrived at this base 6 months ago, eager to help and confident in her medical abilities, was gone. In her place stood someone harder, someone tested by months of treating the worst injuries war could inflict. But even Sarah didn't realize yet just how much the desert had changed her, or what depths of strength and courage lay hidden beneath her careful medical training. Outside, the battle raged on, and Sarah Mitchell prepared to discover exactly who she really was when everything she thought she knew about herself was stripped away by the unforgiving crucible of war. The mortar rounds continued to fall, each explosion bringing the fight closer to her door, and, with it, the moment when her carefully ordered world would be turned upside down forever. The emergency radio crackled to life with reports from around the compound. Guard towers under heavy fire. The main gate taking rocket-propelled grenades, casualties mounting. Sarah listened to the steady stream of updates as she worked, each report painting a picture of a base under siege by a well-coordinated and determined enemy. And somewhere in the chaos of the night, Marcus Kane and his SEAL team were fighting to hold the line, unaware that the quiet nurse from Ohio was about to prove that there was much more to her than anyone, including herself, had ever suspected. The mortar attack continued through the early morning hours, each explosion sending tremors through the medical tent and rattling Sarah's nerves. She had treated 17 wounded soldiers since the attack began, working by the dim glow of emergency lighting while the compound's generators struggled to maintain power. Her hands were steady despite the chaos around her, but inside, her heart raced with each new round of artillery fire. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez burst through the tent flaps, his uniform torn and bloodied from shrapnel. "Mitchell, we need you to prepare for mass casualties. The enemy broke through the perimeter on the east side, and we got hand-to-hand combat in sectors 4 and 5. Sarah nodded, her medical training taking over despite the fear that clawed her chest. "How many wounded are we expecting?" "Too many," Rodriguez replied grimly. "And there's something else. We're running low on ammunition." The supply depot took a direct hit in the first wave of attacks. As if to emphasize his point, the distinctive sound of AK-47 rifle fire erupted much closer to the medical tent than before. Sarah could hear shouting in both English and what she assumed was Pashto, the local language spoken by many of the Taliban fighters. The battle was no longer happening at a safe distance. It was literally at their doorstep. The tent flaps burst open again, and this time it was Marcus Kane who entered, supporting a wounded soldier under each arm. His face was streaked with dirt and gunpowder residue, and his tactical vest showed signs of recent impacts. Despite his appearance, his blue eyes were as sharp and focused as ever. "I've got 2 with urgent GSWs," Marcus said, using military shorthand for gunshot wounds. "And, Sarah, we need to talk." Sarah immediately went to work on the more severely wounded of the 2 soldiers, a young private who had taken a round through his abdomen. As she worked to stabilize him, she was acutely aware of Marcus's presence beside her, his hands surprisingly gentle as he helped apply pressure to control the bleeding. "What did you need to discuss?" Sarah asked without looking up from her patient. Marcus glanced around the tent, making sure they couldn't be overheard by the other medical staff. "The situation is deteriorating faster than anticipated. We're outnumbered 3-1, and they've got equipment we weren't expecting, night vision coordinated communications, heavy weapons. This isn't a typical Taliban assault." Sarah's hands never stopped moving as she worked, but she could hear the worry in Marcus's voice. In the months she had observed him around the base, she had never seen him show even a hint of concern about tactical situations. If Marcus Kane was worried, then things were very bad indeed. "What does that mean for the medical staff?" she asked. "It means you might need to do more than provide medical care before this is over," Marcus replied. "Sarah, I've been watching you for months. The way you move, the way you react under pressure, the way you process information. You have instincts that go beyond medical training." Sarah finally looked up from her patient, meeting Marcus's intense gaze. "I don't understand what you're trying to tell me." Marcus reached into his tactical vest and pulled out a 9mm pistol, setting it carefully on the medical table beside her supplies. "I'm telling you that when the time comes, and it's coming soon, you'll know exactly what to do with that. Before Sarah could respond, the sound of approaching footsteps and urgent voices outside the tent interrupted them. Marcus quickly moved to a position where he could see the entrance while maintaining cover behind a supply cabinet. His entire demeanor had shifted from concerned colleague to lethal operator in the space of a heartbeat. Multiple hostiles approaching from the north, came a voice over Marcus's radio. They've broken through the medical sector perimeter. Sarah felt her blood turn to ice. The medical sector was supposed to be the safest area of the compound, protected by multiple layers of defense. If enemy fighters had reached this far into the base, then the situation was far worse than anyone had anticipated. Sarah, Marcus said quietly, his voice carrying an authority that made her look directly at him. In about 30 seconds, armed insurgents are going to come through that entrance. When they do, you have a choice to make. You can be a victim, or you can be a warrior. But you can't be both. As if summoned by his words, the tent flaps exploded inward, and 3 Taliban fighters rushed inside, their AK-47 rifles raised and ready to fire. Sarah's first instinct was to freeze, her medical training offering no guidance for this situation. But something deeper than training kicked in, something she hadn't even known existed within her. Without conscious thought, Sarah's hand moved to the pistol Marcus had placed on the table. In one fluid motion, she raised the weapon and fired 3 precise shots. The first fighter dropped immediately, a look of surprise frozen on his face. The second managed to get off a burst of automatic fire that went wide, stitching holes across the tent's canvas walls before Sarah's second shot took him down. The third fighter had time to swing his rifle toward her, but Marcus was already moving, his own weapon drawn and firing. The entire engagement lasted less than 5 seconds, but for Sarah, it felt like time had slowed to a crawl. She could remember every detail with crystal clarity. The smell of gunpowder, the weight of the pistol in her hands, the look of shock in the enemy's eyes when they realized a harmless nurse was shooting back. As the echoes of gunfire faded, Sarah stood frozen, the pistol still raised and ready to fire. Her hands weren't shaking, and her breathing was steady and controlled. These reactions surprised her almost as much as her ability to accurately engage 3 armed fighters without hesitation. Marcus holstered his weapon and moved to check on the wounded soldiers who had been caught in the crossfire. "Nice shooting, Nurse Mitchell," he said with what might have been approval in his voice. "I don't understand," Sarah said, finally, lowering the pistol but keeping it ready. "I've never been in combat before. I shouldn't have been able to do that." "Combat isn't always about training," Marcus replied as he helped move the wounded to safer positions within the tent. "Sometimes it's about discovering who you really are when everything else is stripped away." Outside, the battle continued to rage, but now Sarah could hear it differently. Instead of a distant threat, the sounds of gunfire and explosions had become tactical information. She found herself automatically processing the different types of weapons being fired, estimating distances and directions, and calculating potential threats to the medical facility. "Marcus," she said, surprised by the steadiness in her own voice. "What did you see in me that made you think I could do this?" Marcus paused in his work and looked at her directly. "Your father was military, wasn't he?" Sarah nodded, surprised by the question. "Army Rangers. He served 3 tours in Iraq before I was born." "And your grandfather?" "Korean War," Sarah replied, beginning to see where this was leading. "My great-grandfather served in World War II. Military service runs in families," Marcus explained, not because of genetics, but because of values. Honor, duty, sacrifice, the willingness to stand up when others can't or won't. "You've had that training your whole life. You just didn't know it was training." As if to punctuate his words, another group of enemy fighters appeared at the tent entrance. This time, Sarah didn't hesitate. She moved to a position that would give her the best field of fire while protecting the wounded soldiers behind her and engaged the targets with calm precision. Her shots were accurate and deliberate, each one finding its mark with deadly efficiency. When the engagement was over, Sarah realized that something fundamental had changed within her. The fear was still there, but it was controlled now, channeled into heightened awareness and tactical thinking. She was no longer just a nurse trying to survive a combat situation. She had become an active participant in the defense of the compound. "We need to move the critical patients to the underground bunker," Sarah said, her mind now focused on both medical and tactical priorities. "This position is too exposed, and we're going to see more attacks." Marcus nodded, impressed by her rapid adaptation to the situation. Agreed. But we'll need to fight our way there. The route to the bunker goes through two sectors that are currently contested. Sarah looked around the medical tent, taking inventory of their resources and capabilities. In addition to medical supplies, there were several cases of emergency equipment that included additional weapons and ammunition. She had never noticed them before, but now they seemed as important as the surgical instruments. "How many wounded can we move at once?" she asked. "3 stretcher cases if we have enough people to carry them," Marcus replied. "But that means fewer people available to provide security during the movement." Sarah made a decision that surprised even her. "I'll take point security. You and Rodriguez handle the stretcher cases with the other medical staff." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "Sarah, point security is one of the most dangerous positions. Are you sure you're ready for that?" "No," Sarah admitted, "but I'm ready to try." As they prepared to move the wounded soldiers to safety, Sarah reflected on how much had changed in just a few hours. This morning, she had been a nurse whose biggest concern was running out of gauze bandages. Now, she was planning tactical movements and preparing to lead a combat patrol through hostile territory. The transformation should have been terrifying, but instead, it felt like coming home to a part of herself she had never known existed. Every decision she made felt natural and correct, as if she had been preparing for this moment her entire life without realizing it. "Sarah," Marcus said as they prepared to leave the tent, "there's something else you should know. This attack isn't random. Intelligence suggests they're specifically targeting medical facilities to draw our forces into defensive positions where they could be surrounded and eliminated. So we're not just trying to save our patients," Sarah said, understanding the broader implications. "We're trying to prevent a tactical trap." "Exactly," Marcus replied, "which means our movement to the bunker is about more than medical care. It's about denying the enemy a strategic advantage." As Sarah checked her weapon one final time before they began their movement, she thought about the young woman who had volunteered for this deployment 6 months ago. That woman had wanted to help people, to make a difference in the world through medical care and humanitarian service. She had been idealistic and well-intentioned, but also naive about the realities of war. The person who now stood ready to lead a combat patrol through enemy-held territory was still motivated by desire to help people. But she understood that sometimes helping people required more than medical skills. Sometimes it required the willingness to fight, to kill, and to risk everything to protect those who couldn't protect themselves. As they prepared to leave the relative safety of the medical tent, Sarah Mitchell was about to discover just how far she was willing to go to live up to the legacy of service that ran in her family's blood. The battle for the compound was far from over, and the most dangerous part of the night still lay ahead. But for the first time since the attack began, Sarah felt ready for whatever was coming. She had found something within herself that she hadn't known existed, and she was prepared to use it to save lives and defend her fellow soldiers. The nurse from Ohio was gone, replaced by someone harder, more capable, and infinitely more dangerous to anyone who threatened the people under her protection. The route to the underground bunker led through the compound's main courtyard, an open area that would normally be bustling with activity, but now lay eerily quiet under the sporadic light of flares and tracer rounds. Sarah crouched at the entrance to the medical tent, her newly acquired rifle held with surprising familiarity as she scanned for threats. Behind her, Marcus and the other medical staff prepared to move the wounded soldiers on stretchers. "Movement, 2 o'clock, Sarah whispered into her radio, spotting shadows moving between the equipment storage buildings. Her voice was steady, betraying none of the adrenaline that coursed through her veins. Marcus acknowledged her report with a quiet click of his radio, then moved up beside her to get a visual on the potential threats. "I count 4, possibly 5 hostiles," he murmured. "They're using the storage containers for cover, probably planning to ambush anyone crossing the courtyard." Sarah studied the tactical situation with an analytical mind that surprised her. 6 months ago, she would have seen buildings and open space. Now she saw fields of fire, cover, and concealment, and potential ambush positions. The transformation in her thinking was as dramatic as the transformation in her capabilities. "We can't go around them," she observed. "The alternate routes would take us through sectors that are already compromised, and we'd be in the open too long." "Agreed," Marcus replied, "which means we go through them." Sarah felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cool desert night. Going through an enemy position meant engaging in direct combat with superior numbers while protecting wounded soldiers who couldn't defend themselves. It was exactly the kind of situation that military planners tried to avoid, but sometimes war didn't offer better options. What's your assessment of their equipment and training level? Sarah asked, falling naturally into the rhythm of tactical planning. Marcus took another careful look through his night vision scope. They're well equipped. I can see night vision devices and what looks like body armor. Their positioning is good, disciplined. These aren't local insurgents. They're professional soldiers. The implication sent a cold knot of fear through Sarah's stomach. Local Taliban fighters were dangerous, but often poorly trained and equipped. Professional soldiers would be an entirely different level of threat, especially for a hastily organized group trying to evacuate wounded personnel. Sarah, Marcus said quietly, his voice carrying a weight that made her look directly at him. I need to ask something of you that goes beyond anything you signed up for when you volunteered for this deployment. Sarah met his gaze steadily. What do you need? I need you to create a distraction that will allow us to get the wounded across the courtyard safely, Marcus explained. It means drawing their fire and keeping them focused on you while we move the stretcher cases. The tactical part of Sarah's mind immediately understood what he was asking. Creating a distraction against 5 professional soldiers would mean exposing herself to concentrated enemy fire while armed with only a rifle and whatever additional equipment she could carry. It was, by any reasonable measure, a suicide mission. How long do you need? Sarah asked without hesitation. Marcus looked surprised by her quick acceptance. 3 minutes to cross the courtyard and reach the bunker entrance. Maybe 4 if we encounter problems with the wounded. Sarah nodded, already beginning to plan her approach. I'll move to the communications building on the left flank. It has good sight lines to their position and solid cover. If I can get their attention focused there, it should give you a clear path across the courtyard. Sarah, Marcus said, placing a hand on her shoulder. You understand what you're volunteering for? I understand that those soldiers in there can't defend themselves, Sarah replied. And I understand that sometimes the only way to save lives is to risk your own. As she prepared to move out, Sarah thought about her parents back home in Ohio. Her father would understand the decision she was making, the choice to put herself at risk to protect others who couldn't protect themselves. Her mother would be terrified, but she would also be proud. These thoughts gave Sarah strength as she checked her equipment one final time. The run to the communications building required crossing 50 yards of open ground while staying low and quiet enough to avoid detection. Sarah moved with a fluid grace that surprised even her, covering the distance in less than a minute, and reaching the building's protective walls without being spotted by the enemy position. From her new vantage point, Sarah could see the enemy soldiers clearly. Marcus had been right about their equipment and discipline. These were seasoned fighters who had positioned themselves expertly to control the courtyard. Taking them on alone would require more than just courage. It would require tactical thinking and precise execution. Sarah keyed her radio. Overwatch in position. I have clear sight lines to all 5 targets. Beginning distraction in 30 seconds. Copy that, Marcus replied. We'll begin our movement when the shooting starts. Sarah, be careful. Sarah smiled grimly in the darkness. Being careful wasn't really an option when you were about to engage 5 professional soldiers by yourself, but she appreciated the sentiment. She took a deep breath, said a quick prayer to whatever powers might be listening, and opened fire. Her first shot took out the fighter who appeared to be the unit's leader, dropping him with a precise headshot that sent immediate panic through the remaining soldiers. Sarah immediately shifted position within the building, moving to a different window as return fire began to pour into her location. The enemy response was immediate and professional. Within seconds, they had identified her general position and begun laying down suppressing fire while 2 of their number moved to flank her position. Sarah found herself impressed by their tactical competence even as she fought for her life. Moving constantly within the communications building, Sarah engaged targets whenever she had clear shots while avoiding the increasingly heavy return fire. Her rifle work was precise and deadly. Every shot she fired had a purpose, and most found their targets. Within 2 minutes, she had eliminated 3 of the 5 enemy soldiers and wounded a 4th. But the remaining fighters had succeeded in flanking her position, and Sarah suddenly found herself taking fire from 2 directions at once. Bullets shattered the windows around her, sending glass fragments flying through the air and forcing her to take cover behind a concrete wall that was being steadily chewed apart by automatic weapons fire. "Sarah, what's your status?" Marcus's voice crackled through a radio. "Two remaining hostiles, but they've got me pinned down pretty effectively," Sarah replied, having to shout over the sound of incoming fire. "How's your movement?" "Halfway across the courtyard. We need another minute, maybe 90 seconds." Sarah realized with crystal clarity that she probably didn't have 90 seconds left in her current position. The concrete wall that was protecting her was disintegrating under the constant gunfire, and one of the enemy soldiers was working his way closer to her position. Making a decision that would have seemed insane to the person she had been that morning, Sarah grabbed a grenade from her equipment belt. When had she picked up grenades? And prepared to make a final push to eliminate the remaining threats. "Tell me when you're clear," she radioed to Marcus. 30 seconds, came the reply. Sarah pulled the pin on the grenade, counted to 3, and threw it toward the position where the closest enemy fighter was taking cover. The explosion lit up the night and temporarily stopped the incoming fire, giving Sarah the opening she needed to move to a better position. She emerged from the communications building at a dead run, her rifle up and ready as she closed the distance to the remaining enemy soldiers. The element of surprise worked in her favor. They had expected her to remain pinned down in the building, not to come charging directly at them. Sarah's training she didn't remember receiving, but somehow possessed, took over completely. She moved with the fluid precision of an experienced infantry soldier, using cover and concealment while engaging targets with deadly accuracy. By the time the firefight was over, all 5 enemy soldiers were down, and Sarah stood alone in the courtyard, breathing heavily but uninjured. "Overwatch, report your status," came Marcus's voice over the radio. "All threats eliminated," Sarah replied, surprised by how calm her voice sounded. "Courtyard is clear for continued movement." "Outstanding work, Sarah. We're secure in the bunker. Can you make your way to us?" As Sarah began moving toward the bunker, she had time to process what had just happened. She had single-handedly eliminated a 5-man team of professional soldiers while protecting the evacuation of wounded personnel. 6 months ago, the most dangerous situation she had ever faced was dealing with an unruly patient in the emergency room. The underground bunker was a reinforced concrete structure designed to protect essential personnel during attacks. As Sarah made her way down the stairs, she was greeted by the sight of the wounded soldiers she had helped save, now receiving continued medical care in the safety of the protected facility. Marcus was waiting for her at the bottom of the stairs, his expression unreadable. "Sarah, we need to talk." They found a quiet corner of the bunker where they could speak without being overheard. Marcus studied her carefully, as if seeing her for the first time. "Where did you learn to fight like that?" he asked directly. Sarah shook her head. "I didn't learn it anywhere. At least, not that I remember. It just felt natural." "Natural?" Marcus raised an eyebrow. "Sarah, what you just did out there would be impressive for a special forces operator with years of experience. It's not something that just comes naturally to a nurse from Ohio." Sarah sat down heavily on an equipment crate, suddenly feeling the weight of what she had done. "Marcus, I don't understand any of this. This morning, I was worried about running out of medical supplies. Tonight, I just eliminated 5 enemy soldiers like it was something I do every day." Marcus was quiet for a long moment, clearly thinking through something important. Finally, he spoke. "Sarah, I think there are things about your past that you don't know. Things that might explain your capabilities." "What kind of things?" "The kind that intelligence agencies classify," Marcus replied carefully. "The kind that get buried so deep that even the people involved don't remember them." Sarah felt a chill of recognition, as if Marcus was describing something that existed just beyond the edge of her memory. "Are you saying I was some kind of soldier before I became a nurse?" "I'm saying that I think someone invested a lot of time and money in training you for exactly this kind of situation," Marcus replied. "And then they made sure you wouldn't remember that training until you needed it." As Sarah tried to process this possibility, alarms began sounding throughout the bunker. The attack on the compound was escalating, and their brief moment of safety was about to end. But now Sarah faced a new challenge, discovering the truth about who she really was and what other capabilities might be hidden in the depths of her supposedly ordinary past. The battle above ground was far from over, and Sarah Mitchell was about to learn that her transformation from nurse to warrior was only the beginning of a much larger story that stretched back into a past she couldn't remember, but could no longer ignore. The bunker's alarm system shrieked through the concrete corridors, its harsh electronic wail mixing with the distant thunder of explosions from above. Sarah found herself automatically checking her weapon and ammunition count, movements that felt as natural as breathing despite her supposed lack of military training. The wounded soldiers lay on stretchers around the bunker's medical bay, their faces pale in the harsh fluorescent lighting. Marcus was bent over a radio console, speaking in clipped, urgent tones to someone on the other end. The expression on his face told Sarah everything she needed to know about the situation above ground. It was getting worse, not better. "What's the status?" Sarah asked, moving to his side. Marcus looked up from the radio, his blue eyes grim. "The compound is being overrun. They've breached the main gate and taken control of the armory. Command estimates we have maybe an hour before they reach the bunker entrance." Sarah felt her stomach drop. The bunker had been designed as a temporary refuge, not a long-term defensive position. If enemy forces reached the entrance, the concrete walls that now provided protection would become the walls of a tomb. "What about reinforcements?" she asked. "The closest friendly forces are 6 hours away," Marcus replied. "And that's assuming they can get through the Taliban roadblocks that have been set up on all the major routes." Sarah processed this information with the same analytical clarity that had emerged during the firefight in the courtyard. They were cut off, outnumbered, and facing professional soldiers who had planned this attack carefully. In military terms, their situation was hopeless. "So we break out," she said simply. Marcus stared at her. "Sarah, there are 40 enemy soldiers between us and the perimeter fence. We have maybe a dozen people in this bunker, half of whom are wounded. Then, we don't fight all 40 soldiers," Sarah replied. "We find another way." As she spoke, Sarah felt something stirring in the back of her mind. Not a memory exactly, but a sense of familiarity with this type of problem. Planning escapes from impossible situations, thinking 3 steps ahead of an enemy, using unconventional tactics to overcome superior numbers. These concepts felt comfortable to her in a way that medical procedures had never quite managed. Marcus watched her carefully. "What are you thinking?" Sarah moved to the bunker's tactical map, studying the compound layout with eyes that seemed to see details she hadn't noticed before. The enemy is focused on controlling the surface. They've taken the obvious positions, the gates, the armory, the command center. But they're not thinking about underground approaches. Underground approaches to what? Sarah traced a line on the map with her finger. The maintenance tunnels that connect the bunker to the communications array on the hill outside the perimeter. If we can reach the communications equipment, we can call for immediate air support instead of waiting for ground reinforcements. Marcus followed her finger on the map, his expression shifting from skepticism to interest. "Those tunnels haven't been used in years. They could be collapsed or blocked." "Only one way to find out," Sarah replied. "And it's better than sitting here waiting for them to blast through the bunker door." As they discussed the possibility, Sarah found herself automatically calculating distances, timing, and resource requirements. The analytical part of her mind that had emerged during the firefight was now working on a larger problem, and the solutions it proposed felt natural and correct. "Even if we reach the communications array," Marcus pointed out, "it's going to take time to get air support coordinated and on target. We need to hold that position against whatever forces they send to stop us." Sarah nodded. "Which means we can't take everyone. The wounded have to stay here with a small security detail. The rest of us make the run to the communications array." The plan that was forming in Sarah's mind was audacious and dangerous, but it was also their best chance of survival. As she explained the details to Marcus, she watched his expression change from doubt to grudging admiration. "Sarah," he said when she finished outlining her proposal, "you're talking about leading a commando raid against a fortified position held by professional soldiers. Where did you learn to think tactically like this?" The question hung in the air between them, and Sarah realized she didn't have an answer that made sense. The knowledge seemed to be coming from somewhere deep inside her, rising to the surface like water from an underground spring. "I don't know," she admitted, "but I know it will work." Marcus made his decision quickly. "All right, we try it your way. But, Sarah, if this goes wrong, we're all going to die." "If we don't try it, we're all going to die anyway," Sarah pointed out. "At least this way, we die fighting." The maintenance tunnel entrance was hidden behind a false wall in the bunker's lowest level. As Sarah and Marcus worked to clear the access panel, she found herself moving with practiced efficiency, as if she had done this type of thing many times before. The tools in her hands felt familiar, and she knew instinctively which bolts to loosen and which circuits to bypass. Behind them, the rest of their small team prepared for the mission. Rodriguez would stay with the wounded, along with 2 other medical staff members and whatever ammunition they could spare. The assault team would consist of Sarah, Marcus, and 4 other soldiers who had made it to the bunker during the earlier fighting. Radio check, Marcus said as they prepared to enter the tunnel. Each member of the team confirmed their communications were working. The plan required precise timing, and they couldn't afford any coordination failures. Sarah took point as they entered the maintenance tunnel, her rifle ready and her senses alert for any signs of danger. The tunnel was cramped and dusty, clearly in use for years, but it appeared to be structurally sound. As they moved through the darkness, Sarah found herself thinking about the person she had been that morning. Nurse Sarah Mitchell from Columbus, Ohio, would never have conceived of leading a commando raid through enemy-held territory. That woman had been concerned with patient care and medical ethics, not tactical planning and small unit operations. But somehow, the woman moving through this tunnel felt like the real Sarah, as if everything else had been a role she was playing while her true self waited for the right moment to emerge. "Sarah," Marcus whispered from behind her as they paused at a junction in the tunnel. "Are you starting to remember anything about your past?" Sarah considered the question as she checked the tunnel ahead for obstacles. "Not remember exactly," she replied quietly. "But things feel familiar, like muscle memory." "Muscle memory for what?" "For this," Sarah said, gesturing to encompass their current situation. "For moving through hostile territory, for tactical planning, for combat. It's like I've done this before, but I can't remember when or where." Marcus was quiet for a moment. "Sarah, I think when we get through this, you and I need to have a long conversation about classified training programs and memory suppression techniques." Before Sarah could respond, they reached the end of the tunnel. Above them, a metal ladder led to an access hatch that should emerge near the base of the communications array. Sarah could hear activity on the surface. Vehicle engines shouted orders, the metallic sounds of weapons being prepared. "This is where it gets interesting," Sarah murmured, checking her watch. According to their timeline, they had been moving through the tunnel for 45 minutes. Dawn was still 2 hours away, which meant they would be conducting their assault in darkness. Sarah climbed the ladder carefully, pausing just below the hatch to listen for any immediate threats. The sounds of enemy activity were closer now, but she couldn't determine exact positions or numbers from audio alone. Taking a deep breath, she slowly opened the hatch and peered out. The communications array consisted of several large satellite dishes and radio towers positioned on a rocky hill overlooking the compound. From this vantage point, Sarah could see the extent of the damage below. Smoke rising from multiple buildings, the flickering light of fires, and the movement of enemy vehicles throughout the compound. More importantly, she could see the enemy positions around the communications equipment. 2 guards were posted near the main control building, and she could see movement around the primary satellite dish that suggested additional personnel. Sarah eased herself out of the hatch and took cover behind a large boulder, motioning for Marcus to join her. Together, they observed the target area and refined their plan based on the actual conditions they found. "I count 6 hostiles around the communications equipment," Marcus whispered, "plus at least 2 more in the control building." Sarah nodded, her mind automatically processing the tactical situation. "We take the perimeter guards first, quiet and fast. Then move on the control building before anyone realizes what's happening." As they prepared to signal the rest of their team to come up from the tunnel, Sarah felt a strange sense of déjà vu. She had been in situations like this before. She was certain of it, even though she couldn't remember when or where. The feeling was so strong that it was almost disorienting. "Sarah," Marcus said softly, studying her face in the dim starlight. "Are you all right?" "I'm fine," Sarah replied, though she wasn't entirely sure that was true. "Just feeling like I've been here before." "Maybe you have," Marcus said cryptically. "Maybe this is exactly what you were trained for." As the rest of their team emerged from the tunnel, Sarah pushed aside her confusion about her past and focused on the mission at hand. In the next few minutes, she would lead an assault on a fortified position held by professional soldiers. Success would mean the difference between rescue and death for everyone in the bunker below. The nurse from Ohio had completely disappeared, replaced by someone who understood combat tactics and small unit operations as naturally as breathing. As Sarah prepared to give the signal to begin their attack, she wondered who she really was and what other secrets lay buried in the depths of her supposedly ordinary past. But those questions would have to wait. The enemy soldiers around the communications array had no idea that death was approaching them through the darkness, guided by a woman who had discovered that she was far more dangerous than anyone, including herself, had ever suspected. The real battle was about to begin, and Sarah Mitchell was ready to discover just how far her hidden capabilities extended when the lives of her fellow soldiers hung in the balance. The assault on the communications array began at 0347 hours, 3 minutes before dawn. Sarah moved like a shadow across the rocky terrain, her body instinctively finding paths that offered maximum concealment while maintaining sight lines to her targets. Behind her, Marcus and the 4 other soldiers followed in a coordinated advance that spoke to training none of them remembered giving her. The first sentry never knew what hit him. Sarah's knife found its mark with surgical precision, and the guard dropped silently to the ground. The movement felt natural, practiced, as if she had done it countless times before. As she dragged the body behind a communications shelter, fragments of memory began flickering at the edges of her consciousness. Glimpses of training facilities, instructors' voices, the weight of specialized equipment. One down, she whispered into her radio, already moving toward the second perimeter guard. Marcus acknowledged with a single click, his voice carrying a note of professional admiration. In the months he had observed Sarah around the medical tent, he had seen hints of something beneath her surface, but watching her move through a combat environment was like discovering an entirely different person. The second guard proved more alert, turning at the last second as Sarah approached his position. But her response was instantaneous and deadly, a swift combination of hand-to-hand techniques that left him unconscious before he could raise an alarm. As she secured his weapon and ammunition, more memories surfaced, endless hours in training facilities, learning to kill quietly and efficiently. 2 down. Moving to the control building, Sarah reported, her voice steady despite the emotional turmoil of recovering memories she didn't understand. The control building housed the main communications equipment they needed to call for air support. Through the windows, Sarah could see 2 enemy soldiers working at computer terminals, apparently monitoring communications from the compound below. Taking them would require a coordinated assault that neutralized both targets simultaneously. Sarah positioned herself at the building's rear entrance while Marcus moved to the front. On her signal, they would breach simultaneously, each taking responsibility for one of the targets inside. It was a textbook small unit tactic, executed with the precision of special operations soldiers. Breach in 3, 2, 1, execute. Sarah burst through the rear door with her weapon raised, immediately acquiring her target. The enemy soldier at the computer terminal had time to turn toward the sound of breaking glass, but not enough time to reach for his rifle. Sarah's shot was precise and final. Marcus's engagement at the front entrance was equally professional. Within 5 seconds, both enemy soldiers were down, and the communications equipment was secured. Control building secure, Sarah announced. Beginning air support coordination. As she moved to the communications console, Sarah's hand seemed to know exactly which switches to activate and which frequencies to monitor. The knowledge was there, buried beneath years of false memories about medical school and nursing training, but rising to the surface now when it was needed most. Viper 6, this is Broken Arrow, Sarah spoke into the radio, using call signs that she somehow knew were correct for emergency air support requests. We are a small unit in contact, compound overrun, requesting immediate close air support at grid coordinates. The coordinates flowed from her lips without conscious thought, as did the tactical information about enemy positions and friendly locations. She was calling in an air strike with the competence of someone who had done it many times before. Broken Arrow, this is Viper 6, came the response. Confirm your authorization code for emergency air support. Sarah felt a moment of panic. She didn't remember any authorization codes. But then, like a door opening in her mind, the numbers came to her. Victor 77 Delta Niner, she said, wondering how she knew a classified military code. Broken Arrow, authorization confirmed. We have 2 F-16s inbound to your position, ETA 12 minutes. Mark your targets and maintain friendly positions. As Sarah coordinated the airstrike, Marcus was monitoring the perimeter for enemy response to their assault on the communications array. It wouldn't take long for the Taliban forces in the compound to realize they had lost contact with their people on the hill. Sarah, Marcus called from his position at the window. We've got vehicles moving up the access road. Looks like they're sending a reaction force to investigate. Sarah checked her watch. 12 minutes until air support arrived, but the enemy reaction force would reach their position in less than 5. She and her team would have to hold the communications array against superior numbers for at least 7 minutes after the fighting started. All positions, this is Broken Arrow, Sarah announced over the radio. Enemy reaction force inbound. Establish defensive positions and prepare to hold for 7 minutes minimum. The team moved with practiced efficiency to establish a defensive perimeter around the communications building. Sarah found herself automatically assigning fields of fire and interlocking coverage zones, tactical knowledge emerging from depths of her mind she hadn't known existed. As she checked her ammunition and prepared for the coming fight, Sarah finally understood what Marcus had been trying to tell her. She wasn't really a nurse from Ohio who had discovered hidden courage under fire. She was something else entirely, a professional soldier with specialized training whose memories had been suppressed so completely that even she believed the cover story. The first enemy vehicles crested the hill just as the eastern horizon began to show the first hints of dawn. Sarah could see at least 3 pickup trucks loaded with armed fighters, moving fast up the winding access road. In the growing light, she estimated their force of between 15 and 20 enemy soldiers. "Contact front," Sarah called out, settling into a firing position behind a concrete barrier. Multiple vehicles, approximately 20 personnel. The engagement began when the lead vehicle came within effective rifle range. Sarah's first shot took out the driver, sending the pickup truck careening off the road and into a rocky outcropping. The soldiers in the truck bed scattered for cover, but they were caught in open ground with limited options for concealment. Marcus and the other team members opened fire from their positions, creating a coordinated field of fire that caught the enemy force in a deadly crossfire. But the Taliban soldiers were well-trained and well-equipped. They quickly regrouped and began advancing on the communications array using fire and movement tactics. "They're trying to flank us on the left," one of the soldiers reported over the radio. Sarah assessed the tactical situation with calm professionalism that surprised even her. "Rodriguez, shift your position to cover the left flank." "Marcus, can you get eyes on their main force?" "I count 12 hostiles moving up the center approach," Marcus replied. "They're using the communication towers for cover." Sarah made a decision that revealed the depth of her tactical training. "I'm going to move to the primary satellite dish. From there I can get elevated firing positions on their flanking element." "Sarah, that's going to put you in an exposed position," Marcus warned. "It's also going to give me the best sight lines to break up their assault," Sarah replied. "Besides, air support will be here in 4 minutes." Moving from her current position to the satellite dish required crossing 30 yards of open ground while under enemy fire. It was exactly the kind of movement that separated professional soldiers from amateurs, dangerous, necessary, and requiring perfect timing. Sarah waited for a lull in the incoming fire, then sprinted across the open ground with a speed and agility that spoke to years of physical conditioning she didn't remember undergoing. Enemy bullets sparked off the rocks around her, but she reached the satellite dish uninjured and began engaging targets from her elevated position. From her new vantage point, Sarah could see the full scope of the enemy assault. The Taliban forces were more organized and better equipped than she had initially estimated. They were using professional small unit tactics and had obviously planned this operation carefully. But they hadn't planned on facing someone with Sarah's capabilities. Her rifle work from the elevated position was devastating, disrupting their assault and forcing them to take cover in positions that limited their mobility. Every shot she fired was precise and deliberate, and her tactical communications kept the rest of her team coordinated and effective. "Broken Arrow, this is Viper 6, came the voice over her radio. "We have visual on your position. Are you ready to mark targets?" Sarah looked down at the enemy forces arrayed around the communications array. In 2 minutes, those soldiers would be eliminated by precision air strikes, ending the threat to her team and breaking the assault on the compound below. "Viper 6, I have multiple target areas to mark," Sarah replied, pulling out the laser designator that had somehow appeared in her equipment kit. "Stand by for target illumination." As Sarah marked enemy positions for the incoming airstrike, she reflected on how much had changed in the past 12 hours. The woman who had started this day as a nurse treating wounded soldiers had discovered that she was actually a highly trained special operations soldier with capabilities she was only beginning to understand. The F-16s screamed overhead, their engines drowning out all other sounds. Moments later, the hillside erupted in a series of precisely targeted explosions that eliminated the enemy force with devastating efficiency. The Taliban assault on the communications array was over, and, with it, the threat to the compound below. "All stations, this is Broken Arrow," Sarah announced over the radio network. "Targets destroyed, area secure. Compound defense forces can begin counterattack operations." As the smoke cleared and the sound of jet engines faded into the distance, Sarah found herself standing alone on the hillside, finally beginning to understand who she really was. The memories were coming back now in a flood. Years of training at classified facilities, missions in hostile territories around the world, a career in special operations that had been erased to give her a new identity as a civilian nurse. Marcus approached her position, his expression mixing professional admiration with personal concern. "Sarah, how much do you remember now?" Sarah looked out over the compound below, where friendly forces were beginning to move through areas that had been held by enemy soldiers just hours before. The wounded soldiers in the bunker would receive proper medical care, and the base would be secured. "I remember enough," she replied. "I remember that my real name isn't Sarah Mitchell. I remember training facilities and classified missions. I remember being someone who was very good at killing people when it was necessary." "Do you remember why your memories were suppressed?" Marcus asked. Sarah nodded slowly. "Deep cover assignment. Long-term infiltration of medical facilities to monitor for bioweapons research. The nursing identity was supposed to be temporary, just long enough to complete the mission." "What happened to the mission?" "I don't know," Sarah admitted. "Something went wrong, or maybe it was completed and I was supposed to be extracted. But somehow I got left behind with the false memories intact." As the sun rose over the Afghan desert, painting the mountains in shades of gold and red, Sarah Mitchell, or whoever she really was, faced a choice about her future. She could try to return to her life as a nurse, pretending that this night had never happened. Or she could embrace the reality of who she had always been, even when she didn't remember it. Looking down at the rifle in her hands and thinking about the lives she had saved through violence, Sarah realized the choice had already been made. The nurse from Ohio had been a fiction, a role she had played while her real self waited for the moment when her true skills would be needed. That moment had come, and Sarah Mitchell, special operations soldier, professional warrior, protector of those who couldn't protect themselves, was finally ready to accept who she had always been, even when she couldn't remember it. The battle was over, but Sarah's real war was just beginning. Somewhere in the depths of the intelligence community, people were waiting for her to remember who she was and return to a world of classified missions and deadly secrets. The only question was whether she was ready to leave behind the simple clarity of saving lives through medical care and return to the complex moral landscape of saving lives through violence. As Marcus waited for her decision, Sarah looked out over the compound where wounded soldiers were being evacuated to safety, and she knew that some battles were worth fighting, no matter the cost of the person doing the fighting. The woman who had discovered her true identity in the crucible of combat was ready to face whatever came next, armed with the knowledge that sometimes the only way to preserve life was to be willing to take it. The SEAL had assumed she was just a nurse, but Sarah Mitchell had always been so much more.